coffee with you. Kim, I love you for saying it. Thank you so much. Well, we'll be doing a session together later. Get yourself sat down there.
Maybe softening you up so you don't.
It never works. Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm just going to let the latecomers get a seat, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm hoping some of you might recognize me, because if you don't, it means you never ever watch BBC World News. Shame on you if you don't. But my name is Stephen Sackur. I present a show called Hard Talk on the BBC, which does pretty much what you'd expect of a show called Hard Talk. It takes on politicians, business leaders, people that make our world work the way it works, and it asks them tough questions. And it tries to challenge them, and it tries to tease out some of the inconsistencies, some of the contradictions that there sometimes are in public officials between what they say and what they do. Some of those skills may be relevant over the next couple of hours, we'll see, but my job really today is to be a facilitator, a manager of a discussion and a debate, and you will see if you look at your program that what we are tasked with over the next 2 hours is a pretty big mission. It's entitled, Bring It All Together. Somebody said to me, Stephen, that's not what you do. You're usually blowing things apart, not bringing them together. But that's not my job today. My job today is to bring it all together. And I don't know if, like some of you, maybe I'm feeling that I've heard so much that has been fascinating, a lot that's been new to me, a lot of information to take on board, and there's a certain feeling I've got that if I hear much more, I'm going to drown, I'm going to suffer complete information overload, and my systems are going to close down. And I don't want that to happen. So I think it's actually really rather important at this point, toward the end, well, getting toward the end of this important conference, that we take a step back and consider what we've learned. And in particular, we try and be quite specific about the sorts of concrete actions, the sorts of policy recommendations that ought to be put before the leaders of the Club of Madrid as a result of this annual Think Fest. You know, I don't know if you agree with me, but as a journalist, not a cynic, but a skeptic, you know, I'm hearing lots of very great sentiment. I couldn't really disagree with almost everything I've heard from most of the panels today. But in a way, that's the easy bit, you know, finding agreement, finding like-minded folks. What's more difficult is the question of how to turn that into practical action. Action that means maybe 5 or 10 years from now, we're not having the same old debate with the same old statistics, which show how much gender inequality there still is in our world, but we're actually celebrating the fact that things have changed, really changed on the ground in so many countries across the world. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the challenge, I think. So I'm looking for specifics in this session. I'm looking for people to come up with very concrete proposals. Part of my job, I'll just explain how the next session is going to work, and then I'll shut up, I promise. First, we're going to hear from an active politician. We've met and talked to and enjoyed the insight of a lot of politicians who have left the highest of offices and are now perhaps taking more of an advisory and strategic overview from the back of the car rather than the front. But we're delighted to, in a moment, hear from a politician who's very much still in a seat of significant power in Canada, and I'm going to introduce him in just a moment. He's going to address us, reflect on what he believes to be the key issues within this whole sort of theme of striving for gender equality and making a real difference. And when we've heard from him, we have got a fantastic panel already lined up and raring to go. And we're going to hear from each of them, and we're going to stimulate a debate, and we then want it to be highly interactive. I insist, in fact, without any objection, that you guys are going to be asking questions, giving me your thoughts from the floor, and we want to make it as lively and feisty as possible, because 2 hours is quite a long time, and frankly, unless we really get some feisty thoughts from you guys, by 2 hours we're going to be wilting. So we've got to keep it interesting and we've got to keep it lively. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm not going to stand for any nonsense. So that's all to come. But before we get to any of that, it is my pleasure to introduce, as I said, a man who is on the political stage right now. He is the Foreign Minister of Canada. He's held other ministerial posts which I suspect may be of some relevance to our discussion as well, not least environment and transport in Canada. He is, I think, somebody who has shown in office that he cares a great deal about all sorts of social and community issues which are related to the gender topic that we are wrestling with at this conference. Canada, as I'm sure you know, has a pretty strong track record internationally of really making a lot of noise on these issues and trying to influence other countries to seek out some of the best practice that Canada's trying to implement at home. So I think Canada's insight is going to be very important, and I'm therefore very delighted to welcome to the podium right now John Baird. So John, if you would come up right now.
Thank you very much. I'm very thrilled to be here in Little Rock and in this great institution and to have the opportunity to have spent a bit of time with many of you. I'm also very pleased as a Canadian to be joined by our former Prime Minister, Kim Campbell. I was asked, what did you do before you were an elected official? And when I was 23 years old, I was a junior assistant in the Foreign Minister's office when she was Prime Minister. So it's a pleasure to have her amongst us. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. It's a pleasure to take part in the discussions over the past few days. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank our hosts and organizers for their hospitality and for their continued leadership in advancing the rights of women and girls around the world. The range of topics we have covered at this conference reflects the growing consensus about the role of women in contemporary society. They are not just about women's issues. They are not just human rights issues. They're questions of fundamental values. The full participation of women in the political, social, and economic life of their countries and in the world is a prerequisite for global peace and security, for development, and for prosperity. Those countries where there continues to be legal and social barriers to women's full participation and freedom are countries that will not reach their full potential. If we want to promote prosperity, if we want to promote fundamental freedoms, and increasingly, if we want to cut off radical extremism at the knees, we must actively support and promote not just the equality of men and women, but the full participation of women in all parts of society. When women play an active role in society, so many, countless other problems are resolved, and the things we hope to achieve become possible. Global security, access to education, and improve child and maternal health. Secretary Clinton, my good friend to whom I wish a full and speedy recovery, spoke eloquently about these issues at our meeting of the G8 foreign ministers this past April in Washington. G8 leaders at Camp David this year and NATO leaders at Chicago, again in the United States, also included strong statements on the importance of women's participation to development and, just as importantly, to peace. More and more countries are realizing the benefits from having action plans to implement the UN Security Council resolutions on women in peace and security. Canada in 2010 and the United States in 2011 and more are doing it each and every year. The upcoming host of the G8 will be the United Kingdom, and the British Foreign Secretary William Hague has committed to build on the movement by addressing during the UK's G8 presidency later this year the terrible and persistent problem of rape as a weapon of war, and all forms of sexual violence against women and girls, including their trafficking in conflict situations. We must hold those responsible to account, and we must find ways to enhance the will of governments and their leaders to act to help end sexual violence. We must also continue the work being done to end early and forced marriages. Every year, millions of girls, some as young as 9 years of age, are forced into marriage. In the 5 minutes that I've been speaking, nearly 100 children have been forced into an early marriage somewhere in the world. Today, an estimated 1 in 3 girls in the developing world is married before the age of just 18. For too many, the journey from girlhood to womanhood is all too fast and far too brutal. No girl deserves to have her childhood robbed from her. When girls as young as 9 years old are forced against their will to marry, they have no fighting chance at obtaining an education. And without an education, these girls are far too often ill-equipped to parent. As children themselves, they are not ready to be parents. Their bodies are not ready to birth children, and when they do, they often die in labor, have sickly, premature babies, and are far more likely to get HIV/AIDS. It's a vicious cycle that repeats itself and repeats itself and repeats itself as long as we don't act to end this practice. Our government in Canada is standing up for these girls even when it's not always politically expedient to do so. We don't shy away from having the tough conversations. If a country like Canada won't speak up, who will? I recognize it's not a problem that developed overnight. This is an age-old problem, and it won't be solved immediately. But it's time for the global community, all of us, to demonstrate a real commitment to change, not just in words, but in actions. While there is a growing consensus of the importance of the role of women in peace and prosperity, regrettably, it is far from universal. While women played a key role in overthrowing brutal regimes in the countries of the Arab Spring and the beginnings of the transition to democracy and to freedom, the equality of women and their opportunities to fully contribute to national life are far from assured as new governments are formed and constitutions are drafted. I had the chance last week to be in Marrakesh in North Africa and to meet with the new opposition of Syria. It's a new opposition coalition designed to bring desperate factions together to try and seek diplomatic as well as the fighting on the ground solutions to the conflict there. And while Canada is prepared to work with them, while Canada is prepared to fully engage with them, Canada is one of the few countries in the West that hasn't recognized them as the government in waiting, that hasn't recognized them as the sole and legitimate representative of the Syrian people. And it's exactly for the reasons that we described. We are concerned about two issues. One, is this a group that's going to be fully representative of the different minority groups within the country? Is this a group that will make a firm and complete and unequivocal stand against radical extremism? And I got the answer, I think, to both questions with a simple question. I asked, on your council, how many members are there? 76. A great opportunity to be fully representative. And while a lot of people are concerned about the Shia minority or concerned about the future place of Kurds, of Christians, of Alawites themselves, a lot of people are concerned, will there be repercussions and violence after Assad falls? And when I asked him, how many women in your 76-member panel? And I got the answer to both of my questions. 3. And you see, it is not just about the equality of men and women in these situations. I mean, gender equality in and of itself is a noble and important cause, goal, objective. It's important work. But it's just as important for the men in that society that there be the full participation of women on that council, in the government, in civil society, because if we want to ward off radical extremism, we need to get more women involved. And that is why, at a foreign policy level, we've seen tremendous leadership from Secretary Clinton. And it is contagious. This session is about bringing things together, as it was just reported to us. And if I could say maybe two things. One is you had phenomenal leadership from Hillary Clinton at the G8 table, at the NATO table, at the G20 table, where often these issues were simply never addressed. And if I could take notes of two of the speakers earlier today. Earlier this conference. One, a comment by Gina Davis, who said that if she fought hard to get 50% of the directors and producers to be women, it might take 700 years, but that she wanted to affect change for the people that are producing films and entertainment now, the men that are involved in this, and that's important. And then I thought yesterday Mary Robinson spoke of obtaining a critical mass and how that will change decision-making in whether it's the environment, whether it's global peace and security, or whether it's anything within a national government or within an organization. And my message is you really need to do both. It's not a choice of one or the other. And increasingly, these issues are on the agenda, high on the agenda, and ones with which certainly Canada is prepared to continue to work constructively with our friends and allies in governments around the world and in civil societies around the world. Again, thank you very much. It's a real honor and privilege to say a few words. Merci beaucoup.
John, thank you very much indeed. And that's a great way to start this debate, I think, because John crystallized there two very important specific points that he had drawn from the debates we've already had. And, you know, I just jotted down the phrase that he, as an active, serving political leader, gave us. He said, it is now, no question, time to demonstrate a real commitment to action. So we're going to tease out exactly what that might mean. I should tell you, the Club of Madrid have been super efficient through the course of the last 24 hours or so. They have had report writers sort of sifting through everything that was debated by our panels in all of those breakout sessions. We've had 6 different ones, and I'm sure you've all collectively attended many of them. So we've distilled what we think are the very specific sort of conclusions in terms of policy recommendations, recommended specific actions that came out of those 6 breakout sessions. And a little bit later on, I'm going to run through them with you. It's fun for me because it means I can pretend to be a breaking news reporter again. I can give you the very latest news from the breakout sessions. And I think it'll be very good because then I want you guys to respond to what has been distilled as the sort of key recommendations and policy framework points that have come out of our sort of collective brainstorming. We're going to do that in a minute, but we're not going to do it right now because right now it's time for me to introduce our panel of 4, and we're going to get each of them in their particular sort of areas to reflect and, in a sense, draw some conclusions from their own thinking over many years, but also what they've heard over the last 24 hours at this conference. So let me just start at the far end of our panel, and please give a warm welcome first to Sylvia Burwell, who I suspect many of you will know from one of her guises. Sylvia has had a career in government, a long career in government. I think she served all 8 years in the Clinton administration in various senior posts, including in the Office of the Budget and also in Mr. Clinton's own office. She then went on to the Gates Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I said to her, my God, you've worked for America's 2 great bills. Where are you going to find a third bill? Maybe she doesn't need a third bill because she's found a Sam, or sort of, if you see what I mean, I'll explain. She now works for the Walmart Foundation. She's the president of the Walmart Foundation from the Walton family. I'm sure you know. She's actually, therefore, a proud current resident of Arkansas. And Sylvia is, of course, somebody, therefore, who straddles government, civil society, NGO sort of work, philanthropy, and now the private sector. So it's a great insight that we can tap into. So I'm going to start with Sylvia, and then I'm going to introduce the rest of the panel. But Sylvia, as you are now in the private sector, but you bring an awful lot of other experience to this table, I want you to reflect on what you believe the role of the private sector. You know, because we've heard a lot about the government, we've heard a lot about NGOs, but focus now on what you believe the role of the private sector can be in empowering women, and explain to me whether in the end it's driven by commercial interest or by only those parts of the private sector that frankly have some sort of altruistic motive as well.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. With regard to the question of the private sector and engagement in this issue around women, I would start and answer also your question of when and why you do it by saying, first of all, I think the private sector needs and must commit to engaging in these issues. I think it's important and essential for the private sector to play, and I think it's actually for both reasons. It is self-interest and what it's right. When you think about the issue of women in a company like Walmart, 80% of all consumer purchases are made, those decisions are either made or influenced by women, 80%. So when you think about your business, those are your customers. Second, when you run a global company, there's the issue of talent. And when 50% of your talent that you're trying to compete for to get the best people so your company does the best are women. And then I think finally it is because it's what's right. And I think companies do need to think about those issues. So the first thing I would say about private sector engagement is commit. And commit for the reasons, understand why you commit, and commit as a private sector to do that. The second thing in terms of how the private sector should engage is I think that you need to think about three circles: the problem, the solution, and what you're good at. And when you think about the private sector, it's important for the private sector to bring two things to bear. It's both, most private sector entities have philanthropic parts of their organizations, and that's one part. But I think even more important than that is bringing the strengths of the business. Think about what assets your business particularly brings to the table. For instance, at Walmart, as part of our commitment to women's economic empowerment, we're committed to sourcing $20 billion from women-owned businesses over a 5-year period. And so what we bring to the table actually is, because we're a retailer, is purchase of good. And if we can do that from businesses that are women-owned and women-operated, we're contributing directly to the economic empowerment. That's what we do. That's an asset we bring. So I think any private sector engagement really needs to examine, what is your company good at? What do you bring to the table? Align your work with what you're good at so you build on your strengths. And then the third thing, and that's something that's come out of the sessions that we've had here, partnership. And the private sector in a global world, I think understanding, whether it's in all the worlds I've been in, government, NGOs, and now the private sector, the power of partnership. It is the issue. Sometimes you can go faster when you go alone, but you can go further when you go together. And so being a private sector player that is willing to join in partnership with others, because you don't bring everything to the table. You miss pieces, and you can do so much greater, have so much greater impact when you think about that concept of partnership. So that's how I would frame 3 elements of how one should think about private sector engagement.
How much tension is there between you and what you want for Walmart and its foundation, and what the chief financial officer and the guys who watch the bottom line of the huge global corporate that your company is, when you get together, how much tension is there between you, and particularly when you really go for targets like this 20 billion of contracts to be signed with women-owned companies? I mean, that may not actually be the best thing for your bottom line.
Well, I think one of the things is both short-term and long-term interest, and the company thinking through those things, and the commitment. As I said, when 80% of your customers are women, in our business, it makes a big difference. When we source from women, not always, but often women actually understand what women want and demand in terms of products. And so the question of the tension usually comes down to the specifics, and when you're specifically trying to implement. And what I've found, and I've been there a year, but what I've found is that the interest is there, the desire is there. What my colleagues in the CFO's office need, they need the path. They need the tools. So when you think about a buyer at Walmart who spends 15 minutes with every supplier meeting, that's their day, a series of meetings like that. The constraints that they face with regard to meeting comp sales increases, that means they need to increase the sale of their product year over year. And so when you think about their constraints, where the tension comes in is recognizing what their day-to-day constraints are, what you're trying to do. There's generally a willingness, but what they want is a path. So from the perspective of our buyers, and we've interviewed 70 of them as part of trying to figure out how to make this effort work, to a buyer they say, show me the women-owned businesses that are in my space. I sell tires. I don't seem to see any women-owned businesses. I sell X, show me. And so the tension comes in understanding what the constraints are on one side as you think about what you're trying to do. And most people are open, they just need a path. They're trying to get in there and do their job every day, and they just need a path. And so that's where the tension comes, is understanding sometimes how to give them that path.
And just a thought about capitalism and the free market. I mean, there isn't a company that perhaps is more symbolic of the triumph of American-style capitalism than Walmart. But there's been a lot of talk in various breakout sessions and in plenaries too about interventions to change the dynamic and to change the reality of the discrimination against women in different forms. And one of the things that has been frequently referred to is quotas. I mean, do you think there is, in the longer term, a role for government to impose quotas on private sector enterprise in terms of ensuring, greater economic gender equality?
I think the issue of quotas is a complicated one, and having worked on quotas and those issues, the mend it, don't end it efforts during the Clinton administration is one that I spent personal time on. I think it's a complicated issue, and I think when one can find a path where there is true behavioral change and true actual change, that's your better path for long-term change. So at Walmart, as a corporation, over 20% of our board are women. When you look at, having that be embedded in the way you think about, in terms of the CEO of Sam's, she's a woman. The number 2-3 in the U.S. business, a woman. The head of information technology, a woman. Getting that in place.
But 20% is 20%. It's
20% is not the number.
40%, and it sure ain't 50%.
No, and the question is our quotas the right way to get there to get the permanent change? And so one of the things that I think is a helpful tool, and it's part of our women's economic empowerment, that isn't a quota approach, but we think will have great impact because we've seen it work in our sustainability. As part of the initiative, we will be asking all of our top suppliers of both professional services and merchandise to fill out a report that tells us the number of women and minorities that they have on their Walmart serving teams. And by doing that, we aren't putting in place a quota, and some could argue that you should, but we are telling them it will be part of our decision making. And so when you are competing for Walmart business, and we will be a large part of most companies' business if they get our business, when they understand it is something they will be judged on, we see behavioral change. We've seen it in sustainability. We've tried this in our law firms, and we've seen it with our law firms. So right now, trying to use other tools. I think the question of can you succeed and use other tools, you need to try it and see.
Yeah, but if you can't, then you've got to reassess.
I think you do have to reassess, but I think at this point, in terms of this specific example, Walmart and the specifics, I think we're going to give this a try.
All right. Well, Sylvia, thanks ever so much for now. Obviously, we're going to come right back to you, but just moving along the panel for now, let's give a warm welcome to Mayra Bovinic. And Mayra has long experience and has indeed written extensively about gender and development and poverty issues. She's currently a senior fellow with the UN Foundation, and she works a lot with Vital Voices. And for, I think, about 6 years, you were based at the World Bank, Director for Gender and Development at the World Bank. So I want to stick with the sort of economic empowerment side of our two-edged debate with you for now, Mayra, and just get your perspective, and particularly thinking about the work you've done at the World Bank and elsewhere, your perspective on what we now should regard as the most sensible actions that can be taken to hasten the economic empowerment of women.
Thank you, Stephen. And I'm going to be quite specific.
Good.
Maybe too specific, but I'm now coordinating a project for the UN Foundation and ExxonMobil Foundation. And it came about because ExxonMobil had been investing on women's economic empowerment for many years, about $60 million or whatever. And at some point they stopped and they said, well, but we really do not know if what we are doing is the most effective thing to do to empower women economically, and most importantly also, is it the most cost effective? So we are in the final stages of this research. We have commissioned about 17 different research teams, are basically putting together what there is in terms of credible evidence of what works to promote women's economic empowerment, for whom and where. We have looked at what we really care about, and how we have defined economic empowerment is simply increases in women's productivity and earnings. And we are trying to also figure out which interventions are most cost effective. And if they're not, because there's very little data on cost effectiveness, at least which interventions are simple so that they can be scaled, so that they can reach large numbers of women. So I'm going to be talking about just some preliminary lessons of what we have found, particularly in the area of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is not anything trivial. Of about the 3 billion jobs in the world, about half of them, 1.5 billion, are jobs outside the formal labor market, in self-employment, in very small farms or firms. And women are overrepresented among those that are the very smallest entrepreneur. And the kinds of interventions that have been done have tried to morph this very small subsistence level entrepreneur into a high growth entrepreneur. So the interventions really are trying to make women's very small businesses grow, and they can become transformational entrepreneurs, high level entrepreneurs. So what are some of the lessons? And just let me obviously say that before, these are very much project, very specific lessons. Obviously, we all know that the policy environment really does matter, and that it's very important to change policies to make the enabling environment as enabling as it is for women, as it is for men. And I think that there is a study of the IFC, the International Finance Corporation. They looked at laws in countries that either promote businesses or prevent people from doing business, and they found that out of 140 countries, only in 38 countries the laws were equal for male and women. In 103 countries, so in a majority of the countries, there was at least one regulation or one law that discriminated against women. But anyway, so let me just go to the more specific lessons. The first one, and once I tell you, you will say, yeah, this is very commonsensical, but up to now I think that the evidence had not been put together this way, is that capital alone, either as a loan or a grant, is not enough on its own to grow subsistence level female-owned firms. This does not mean that microfinance is not a very important and useful financial services for poor women. But for the very poor women, if you just give them a loan, if you just give them cash, that is not going to grow their very, very small businesses. Now, and I'm talking about really subsistence level women that have a very small micro business with about earnings of around $80 to $100 a day, a month, $1 a day, and no employees. So we're talking really small business. There's evidence now on this from a variety of different countries, and this is very credible evidence. There's evidence from Sri Lanka, India, Philippines, Africa. And why is it this? Why is, if you give cash to women, it just, very small women, it doesn't work? When you give credit and loans to men, it works better. Men are able to use the credit to grow their businesses. Why? And this is partly because women, especially in poor households, unlike men, are expected to do things for the family when they get a windfall cash. So if they get cash, they will invest it in the family. But, however, there is one thing for very poor women that does work. And I'm going to take a disclaimer first, that before I got here, I had no idea that HIFER headquarters was next door, because what HIFER is doing really makes a difference, and it's cost effective. And what it has been found is that for very poor women, subsistence level entrepreneur, more is better. A large enough capital transfer in the form of a cow, for instance, which is what Heifer does, paired with specific business training over a 2-year period, really makes those very small businesses grow significantly. They transform themselves. And it's expensive to do, but the results show that it's very cost effective. And this is the very first and very important lesson. Not all women are the same, and not all women's businesses are the same. If you're dealing with very poor women, you have to help them with a bundle or a package of services. And you cannot just give them one service, but if you give them large enough capital, you give them a cow versus a chicken, and you give them cash and training in how to handle the cow, their businesses really grow. Now, for more successful, upper level women businesses, capital itself can really make a difference. However, again, if capital is given in kind, it's much better than if capital is given in cash. And this is again because when women have money, they tend to have to give it, to spend it in family issues, or even to pass some of it away to relatives. There's an incredibly interesting experiment, laboratory experiment that was done in Kenya. And it was a game, and in the experiment, they gave women and men money to invest in a business. And in some of the cases, the money was visible. In other of the cases, the money was hidden, so nobody knew. And in some of the cases, the people around them were relatives, in others not. For men, it didn't matter if the money was visible, non-visible, hidden. The men invested X amount of money into this business. For women, however, when the money was visible, when other people there knew how much money the women were going to invest, and particularly when there were relatives around, women invested very little because they didn't want to show to the relatives that they had money available. And why? It's simply because in poor families, when women have cash, they're obliged to give a certain percentage of cash to the family or to the relatives. So, and here is the second very important lesson. One of the miracles of mobile phones is that they make your cash investments private. They make them confidential. And now there is sufficient research that shows that giving capital to women through mobile phones, and there have been experiments in Niger and in other places in Africa, really makes a difference. Much more so than for men. Women then invest the money that they get through the mobile phone in the business, grow the business, and for a very simple reason, the money is confidential. The transaction is confidential. They don't have to tell anybody what they're doing with the money. Finally, I'm going to give you one last lesson. The other really very interesting set of data that is coming in, and all these are very, very sort of rigorously done experiments and field experiments and natural experiments, is that savings, micro savings, any kinds of savings are incredibly important for women. Women use more than men saving vehicles when they get them. They often do not have access to saving vehicles. They invest more, they use savings more, and then they invest that money into their businesses and their businesses grow. So one of the basic lessons here is, well, you know, savings, people have informal saving systems all over the place. Many people just basically put the money under the bed. Formal savings are much better than informal savings, obviously. You're much better off saving through the formal banking system than through informal savings. Women, unfortunately, just do not have access to formal savings in the bank. They save, and they will save even at a cost to themselves, because they may end up paying interest in order to save in the informal system. But they have this incredible need to have a reliable vehicle for savings. So a big policy implications is really, and I think it's for the private sector, for the commercial banks, you know, really try to develop vehicles that are appropriate for women, not only to have credit, but to have saving mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara. It was fascinating. Really, really interesting, and I could see a lot of people sort of taking notes, because that was sort of just real data and evidence-based practical information about what works. But very briefly, if you could just follow up by telling me, you know the multinational institutions like the World Bank very well, and I'm sure you know what they are doing right now in terms of trying to use assistance, financial assistance, in ways that helps empower women and reduce gender inequality. But are you suggesting that, given what you've just told us about what works and what maybe doesn't work, are you suggesting they need to adapt? They're not doing things right now. Is that a conclusion we can draw?
No, I'm not saying that. I mean, I obviously would not say that. What I'm saying is that up to very recently, and the bank, I think, is one of the premier institutions that has put together a World Development Report on gender equality and development. That report is very good in explaining why women are worse off than men. What are the gaps, what are the gender gaps, and why they're there. But what that report, I think, doesn't do, and nobody until now has done, is start looking now at, well, what works? You know, and what is the evidence that we have that then will enable us fine-tune our programs. I mean, these are not big, transformative things to do. These are just minor changes sometimes, but that can really make a difference. And I think that's...
I mean, I'm just interested, for example, your message seemed to be that microfinance on its own, you know, shouldn't be overhyped. What it can achieve shouldn't be overestimated. And you've got to have a slightly more sophisticated understanding of what women need.
Right, and I think the very important message is not all women are the same. You have to target interventions for different levels of women. With very poor women, entrepreneurs, it's very different, their situation, from better off women. So the interventions have to be more customized. Some of the interventions. Other interventions, like, you know, this issue of mobile phones just opens up an incredible potential to affect very large numbers of women and to really get them into a productive economic activity.
Well, that's absolutely true, and I've seen that for myself in reporting trips I've made in Kenya and Nigeria, and clearly in Africa. Mobile phone technology is massively important, and I think we're going to hear more about that. But actually, moving it on to that line about technology and understanding what potential it can offer leads me to our third panelist, Melanne Verveer, who many of you, I think, will know. She's President Obama's Ambassador-at-Large on global women's issues. She's served in government in different capacities for quite some time, not least as a chief sort of, I was going to say sidekick, but that sounds very rude, but a chief advisor and assistant to Hillary Clinton in the White House when she was First Lady. And Melanne has, of course, supported women's rights and political and economic empowerment through all sorts of different policy initiatives. She's also heavily involved, I think, as co-CEO of Vital Voices. And I want you, if you would, Melanne, to draw some conclusions out of the sessions and the different discussions we've had about the potentials of technology. And also, I think you've also been thinking about what we've discussed in terms of natural resources and gender issues there. So give us your thoughts at the end of this.
Well, thank you. And let me say at the outset that I would be remiss if I didn't salute Canada and its commitment. Our colleague has left, but not only the call to action here and its evidence-based situation, but I must tell you, because I'm in a lot of these multilateral meetings, and Canada is a true leader on these issues that we're discussing here, and it's very refreshing because, frankly, it's a lot of men doing the leading on women's issues, and as he said, because they're not just about women either. But we're here to talk about 21st century solutions, and oftentimes when we discuss technology or we discuss natural resources, we don't put women in the same sentence. But yet their access to and utilization of, call them tools of empowerment or endowments, agencies, they are absolutely critical to women's progress. And I want to continue the conversation where we left off, which is on mobile technology, because we know from the studies that have been done that there's a gender gap in mobile technology. Some 300 million fewer women have access to cell phones, and you might say, so what? Well, those cell phones, those simple tools, and we're not talking about the fanciest models, are absolutely critical in so many different ways. It provides women who are the majority of the illiterate around the world a tool for literacy. Vital health information that might not be garnered any other way can come through the cell phone. We're talking here today in this session about economic empowerment. It is an absolute critical tool for the simple farmer to find out what the weather is on a given day and how the plantings will be done, to where the market is. You know, in too many places, women walk for hours often to get to their market. With a cell phone, they can find out if there's a market there before they start to walk. So it is a tool of economic empowerment, and I think the most transformative reason potentially is what Myra talked about, and that is cell phone banking and what it represents, both in terms of a safe place to save, which what most women do not have. The great majority of the poor around the world are unbanked. Imagine what those savings represent and what can be done with them. And it also enables them to make the kinds of transactions to use the resources that they have kept in that safe place for the moment when they want to make an investment, albeit small, but it is transformative. And we have not begun to see the extraordinary impact this is going to have. And this is another one of those areas that requires both government and the private sector. Secretary Clinton last year worked with GSMA, the Cell Phone Association, the trade association for network operators, to make a commitment that involved government and the private sector to cut this gender gap in half. The operators are making inroads into enabling more women to have access. Recent data out of Iraq and Indonesia is incredibly encouraging. And for government's part, we have done business plans that show that this is not just about doing good, but you can do well too if you focus on the bottom of the pyramid. So this whole area is a 21st century solution that has tremendous potential impacts that are yet not untapped. Another area is the clean cook stove. Imagine the fact that so many women, and it is the women who do the cooking, do it in conditions that are spewing black carbon into the environment and basically providing tremendous health damage to themselves and their families. Just this week or late last week, a new Lancet report came out that showed the negative health impacts of the way women cook in the developing world is now killing about 4 million people every year, and that factor is the fourth most significant health factor for deteriorating health. And any of you who have been in any of these villages or even in cities where these methods of cooking go on, within no time your eyes are burning, your throat hurts, you can't swallow. Imagine those conditions every day, day in, day out. But perhaps most significantly for purposes of this discussion, the cook stove, the sales and maintenance of cook stoves is becoming a viable economic business for women in the developing world. I was with a group of women not too long ago from India who were telling me very proudly as the cook stove was placed in front of them. One went on and on and on. I didn't understand what she was saying. It was in her dialect. Somebody was telling me a little bit, and I said, you know, you're so enthusiastic about these cook stoves, you could be selling them. And everybody burst out laughing because she was selling them and they had a really viable business. And that's where a lot of this technology is. It's not a handout. It's acclimating it in a way that fits the needs of the people where they live, the climates in which they operate every day, but also providing a tool of business possibilities and the maintenance of those cook stoves. And this is catching on, and today there is the Alliance of Clean Cook Stoves that is looking to ensure access to about 100 million people by 2020 to provide clean cook stoves for them as opposed to what they're dealing with today. So this is another huge area with enormous impacts for health, for the environment, but also an incredible potential tool for economic opportunity for women. Thirdly, let me just briefly say, building on what President Clinton said last night and the head of the Heifer Foundation, women are absolutely vital to agricultural productivity. And we know already the statistics about the great majority of smallhold farmers in much of the world are female. But I think what is important for this discussion to bear in mind is that we know today from all of the data that where women farmers have the same access to resources that male farmers have, and that's everything from fertilizer to machinery to seeds to training to the ability to participate in decisions to markets, etc. When that situation is equalized, they can become more productive by 20 to 30%, and in the aggregate, that represents feeding 150 million more people. So we're talking about, again, something extremely significant for purposes of larger economic challenges, and as their income goes up and as their children get better nutrition, all of that has enormous positive value. And then lastly, the whole area of climate change and the environmental conditions today are issues that are peculiarly women's issues for the benefit of the world, but yet women are not part of the discussion for the most part. And I want to salute Mary Robinson, I want to salute Tara Hallinan for the work that they have been doing. Mary just recently came from the Doha climate change discussions to really begin to work at changing policies so that from the local level to the national to the global level, women can be more participatory in these decisions. We hear all the time, this is the context we hear about women. Oh, they're so severely impacted by climate change. The degradation of the environment so terribly impacts them. But nobody goes to the next piece of that, which is they are vital players in making a difference in this arena, whether in adaptation or in mitigation, and particularly in green technologies, everything from new ways to access energy that aren't environmentally depleting, to sustainable agriculture, to so many other ways. So green technology in the context of the larger global challenge, there are markets for this, and I think it's another 21st century solution that we have to focus on. So mobile technology, cook stoves, women's role in agriculture, and the whole area of climate change and environment.
Thank you, Melanne. I just want to ask you one question which actually isn't about all those really important specific projects, and I asked you to be specific, so I thank you for that, but it's actually just a reflection on your job title as much as anything. I mean, you are Obama's Ambassador-at-Large for global women's issues. Now, there aren't a whole lot of governments in the world who have an Ambassador-at-Large for global women's issues. And, you know, I just want to ask you whether maybe we are slightly deluding ourselves about what can be achieved on a global front like this, when in this forum, you know, we have no representation from China. As far as I'm aware, we don't have anybody here from Russia, from India. I could be wrong, but I'm not sure. I don't think we have anybody here from Brazil. You know, these are some of the world's most powerful economies now. The Chinese economy is going to be the most powerful, the biggest economy in the world within 15 to 20 years. And there's no sign that they're particularly interested in this sort of agenda that people talk about at meetings like this around the world. So with your hat on as a diplomat at large for women's issues and women's empowerment, to what extent can you be confident that the sorts of things that everybody here wants to see delivered are going to be delivered when there are so many, it seems, non-participants in this debate?
Well, they may not be in this room, but that doesn't mean they're not participating in this debate.
The Chinese, I mean, what sort of...
The Chinese have been very involved, for example, in the whole area of clean cook stoves. Right. We have worked extensively with them when it came to the whole issue of sustainable development and the necessity of women's participation in that. They were out front on it. Now, there is change and there is change. There is the ultimate place where we all want to go together in terms of progress, but that's not to negate the kind of work that's going on in so many places today. One of the reasons that the president, I think truthfully at the urging of Secretary Clinton, created this position is because there is a recognition today that whether it has to do with governance, the environment, security, economics, all of the things that are permeating the discussions over the last yesterday and today, that you cannot get there unless women are fully participating and active in tackling these issues. You can't take away half the talent of the world and say you don't belong. We've had discussions here, and our friend from Canada mentioned the Arab Spring. Well, what the Arab Development Report showed rather clearly is those countries are at the bottom in terms of progress, economic and otherwise, because women, for the most part, have not been enabled to participate economically or politically. If that doesn't change, they don't begin to climb, and they don't begin to be able to provide for the people in their countries in ways that are going to keep them in power or turn them out of power again. So I think there is a growing recognition, and beyond that, there is an enormous mountain of new research, data, studies from all kinds of sources that show whether it's economic growth or whether it has to do with security issues. If women aren't participating, then we're not going to have the end results we want. So this is about self-interest, whether it's China's self-interest, India's self-interest, anybody's self-interest at this point. It's not just, as Secretary Clinton so often says, the right thing to do. That's important. This is a human rights framework. But it is the smart, strategic thing to do. And if we neglect the smart, strategic thing wherever we sit, wherever we're in power, then we're not going to have the kinds of results we want to see.
Great. Well, thank you, Melanne. And I should just say, everybody, you're all being incredibly patient, and I can tell you, finding the speak is really engaging, but believe me, you are going to get a chance to participate, and I'm going to make sure that does happen. But, and sir, just hold your horses, because before we do that, I just want to introduce and hear from Bineta Diop, who is the director, she's the founder of Femmes Africa Solidarité, which is an extraordinarily important NGO in Africa, which has been involved in peace-building programs. Bineta herself has led election monitoring teams in post-conflict countries in Africa. She, I think, personally was a great driver of getting gender equality in the African Union Commission, which wasn't the easiest task in the world, but I think you're going to learn she's a pretty feisty individual, and she made that happen. And for all of these reasons, for the work she's been doing for years in Africa on women's empowerment and gender issues, she was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in 2011. And I know we all read our Time Magazine list every year. Some of you in the room hoping you'll be on it. But Bineta really was on it. So that I think is just one other sign of just how influential she's become across Africa. And Bineta, I know you've been involved in the workshops and the brainstorming, particularly on the security issue. And it's the same thing really as for the other panelists. I want you to reflect on what you've heard so far and offer your specific sort of takeaway points that you think are very important when one is talking about not just the rhetoric, but about practical action that might come out of here.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here today and going to report on women, peace and security. It's a big issue, but in particular on UN Resolution 1325, because I think that when the resolution was adopted, it gave us some hope that...
Bineta, just remind, for anybody in the audience who isn't quite sure or doesn't remember exactly the significance of that resolution, just very briefly tell us. 1325
was adopted 12 years ago, and which is for us an agenda for peace. For us women's group, we call it the weapon for peace. Because when the men are using our quote, are using our body in the war, for us we are saying that we have a weapon that we can use with the three pillars: the protections of women, the participation of women, in particular in peace negotiation, but also in security, but also the prevention aspect. So the three pillars that are the main component of 1325. 12 years after the adoption of 1325 and other resolution, 1820 and so on, which all related to women's participation by Security Council, we still see a lot of gaps. And during our discussion, most of the issue that we are looking at is, what about implementation? How do we make our member state accountable? Some member states have adopted national action plan, for example. We see that America is working on a national action plan, because we say that it's not only the country that are in war or getting out of war that need 1325, but the country also that are sending troops to some of those countries need also to look into the gender inside the security aspect. So that is where we say 1325 after 10 years is not implemented fully. Some of the issues that, I was a few weeks ago in DRC when the M23 were entering into Goma. I was there. I was there because I was in a Solidarité mission to support the women's group on the ground, to see how the women displaced are living their life in those camps. I was there, I went to Dr. Mukwege Hospital to see how they are repairing the body of the women that have been traumatized. I didn't expect that M23 was coming into that time that particular time in Goma. When they enter, first of all, some of the issue we have been discussing when I was in the camps is still inhuman, degrading. Women don't have anything to eat in those camps in Goma. Women don't have water in those camps. That's the reality that I saw. Women don't have shelters in those camps. While I was in the camps, people were coming down from the hill. And what they were saying, and the children without parents. When I asked them what is happening, they're shooting out there. So we are coming down. So more displaced. And when M23 enter, the displaced become displaced again because they were shooting. So fine. Of course, I was escorted by MINUSCO, but when M23 came, I didn't have any more escort. So that's the situation on the ground in Goma. When I went to the hospital, you can meet with the women that their body that have been raped 20 times were sex slaves of some of the boys. Those are things that you see on the ground. Traumatized. That's the reality of 1325 right now in some of those countries, our countries. What do we do next? Because for me, I was invited by the Security Council a few weeks ago after that trip to share, not just for DRC, but other countries, that is happening in Mali, the northern Mali. What do we do about this? Are women participating in the negotiation that is going in North Mali or even in Uganda? So the participation of women is still lacking in women, peace and security. What do we do to make sure that they are there? Their agenda of human security, because those are things that we have been discussing. Their agenda of human security is at the table. The education, our sister from Uganda said it, the education issues, the health issues, the specific need of women, how do we address those issues? My sister, the Zainab Bangura, who is a special representative of the Secretary General, said to us yesterday, one of the key issues is to make sure, to ensure that our government take leadership and are accountable. How do we make that? How do we make that? Because 1325 is there at the mechanism. We go to the different, to the Security Council. The African Union will say what? You know, it's a Security Council resolution. So we need to make some of those institutions. The EU have adopted a regional action plan. National action plan exists. But how do we make sure that African Union have, for example, an action plan, a regional action plan, because it will help in the accountability mechanism that we want to put in place. Because I see that NATO have put a special representative on 1325, which probably will help in the implementation by looking into the different mechanisms on the military, on the troops, on the personnel, so on and so forth. So we need to make our state accountable on what is happening with the people on the ground. So that's I wanted to share with you on 1325.
No, well, I appreciate that very much. When you talk with such passion, Bineta, I'm left with a slight contradiction in my mind. On one level, you're quite clear that you know, Africa has to find its own solutions and Africa has to be held accountable. And it is down to Africans, and you know, goodness knows your own project, your own initiative is all about Africans taking charge of their own destiny.
Leadership.
And yet, you know, a lot of the discussion here has been about how our outside institutions, whether it be United Nations, European Union, the United States as a key player, should be trying to tie future economic relationships, future assistance to particular benchmarks on women's issues, gender equality issues, elimination of sexual violence against women. You know, to what extent do you think the outside world, and let's face it, primarily the rich world, has a really important future role to play? And to what extent do you think, in the end, this is about, as Mr. Gisano was saying, it's about finding ways to sort of change the African mindset from within? And I'm sorry to generalize about Africa. I mean, this is particular nations we're talking about. It's maybe wrong to talk about Africa as a whole, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think, of course, we need the partnership, the international support, because Africa itself alone cannot do it. That's the reality. And that's why, while we are saying that we African have to find our solutions, it has, you know, have made a mess that we need to pick up those pieces. And it has to change ourselves, the mindset within Africa. I think that is clear. And the women are mobilizing, and this is some of the things, they are mobilizing to find solution. But we need the international support. Without the international support, I don't think that we will get where we want to get. We can mobilize, highlight some of the issues, but it has to be in partnership with the international community. When we go to testify or to talk to the Security Council, you know, we know that without the Security Council support, in DRC, you will not have the security sector reform. And for me, it's important that we look into the security sector reform in DRC and see how the police, for example, can bring security in some of those camps. And how do we bring contingent of women into the police that can bring security of those people on the ground? Without the Security Council, I don't think that the AU can bring some troops. They are bringing troops. ECOWAS is doing the same thing, for example, but we want more to get others to support. The same thing, not just in the security, but in the judiciary. DRC, again, another example, need a strong support in reforming and making sure that justice is at the table, because what we realize is that the impunity is rampant in the country like DRC. Those who are making, the perpetrators of violence are not brought to justice. They are promoted, quote. They become the leader of the police after raping 20 or how many women. So we need to look into the justice system. We need to look into the security system, but we need the international community. Lastly, we ask our member states to do national action plan. We ask the military to do action plan on women, peace, and security. But we have another category that we never touch. How do we engage the dialogue with the extractive industries? And this is where we think that our sister can help us. Because those that are receiving the dividend of those, extractive resources, while they have the responsibility on the ground to participate in the social transformation, but we don't see it. Goma is the richest region in the world in terms of minerals. But yet, this is where the women are not eating. I asked them, when did you get your ration last time? They said August. So I asked them, what do you eat between August and now? I go and fetch wood, and I sell the wood, so I am able to buy something to eat. That's the thing I saw there, and this is real. So by the time we see planes that are extracting and going outside, of course, we are saying, we need to mobilize not just within Africa, but outside as well. And I think that is where this women's movement, global movement on peace and security, that we have been forming with Mary Robinson, Melanne, and others, to make sure that, we get out there, not just question the Security Council, but also the people outside there. Because it's by mobilizing that we can question on the issue of rape, violence against women, but also we can question on other issues that is going on women, peace and security. So the mobilization and the common agenda building is crucial in this. We cannot do it alone.
Well, clearly you've devoted a lot of your life to international mobilization, but let me just ask you something a little bit personal. It might sound like a daft question, but, well, let me begin with a very basic one. You're from Senegal, aren't you?
Yes.
Yes. What are the, realistically, if you wanted to, and I don't know if you do, but if you wanted to translate your passion and your convictions and your very clear sense of where your nation and your continent should be going on this particular set of issues, but more generally, I think you have strong political views. What are the chances of you, or somebody like you, Bineta Diop, being able to play a national political role in Senegal right now?
Let me just give you a small example, not me, Bineta Diop, but the women of Senegal, we have that. Maybe, if I'm not modest, I will see under my leadership. You have seen on TV, the media is so important, but sometimes they fuel our conflict. What happened in Senegal recently was we saw the two parties in conflict, the outgoing government led by President Wade, and we saw the opposition party. I'm not going to get into who was right or wrong in terms of the constitution and so on. So, yeah, there was a conflict. Everybody was saying Senegal will be the next one to be the country, the next one in war. That was reality, and you have seen it. And we had clash in the street. The young people in the street demonstrating with their stones, and we had the police that was shooting. So we had started to see a kind of civil war starting in our country, because what we need to know now is elections that are the democratic process to get in power. Right now, elections are part of our problems and not part of the solution, and should be part of the solution. So wherever we talk about sharing of power right now in Africa, you see the conflict, and instead of settling the difference through the ballot, we do it through the bullet. That's the thing. That's the reality right now in Africa.
But I guess the question is...
So the women of Senegal mobilize. They really mobilize, and they call themselves the women in white. They were demonstrating, doing rallies to say, we are who? The silent majority in the middle. You might have these two extremes that are fighting, but in between you have those that you never heard, who know what they're going to do the next day if they allow them to vote, but they don't want to be visible through the media because they will be seen as partisan for one side or another. So the women play a key role by mobilizing, and the young people in the street to say, no, we want Senegal in one, and we are sending Senegal first. They mobilize and put pressure on two parties, not only the women, there are other actors, civil society and so on, but they play a critical role. And there, I will join what Melanne have said, because through the mobile phone, they were trained to do civic education, election observing. They were deployed all over Senegal to monitor the result of the elections. That was the part of monitoring they did so well, and to build the confidence and to make sure that everything was transparent for the outgoing president to accept the result. The women played a key role, and I think through mediation, because they were mediating as well. We used 1325 to go to the religious. Senegal is a religious. We went to the church. We went to the mosque. We went everywhere to meet with the population, but also those leaders to tell them we want peace in Senegal. And I think that is, through the situation room, I think that we use the mobile phone to reach out there to get the information the minute that it is happening underground. So I think that I myself was involved in this process. I led the process in Senegal because it was my country and I didn't want to see Senegal being part of another crisis that is happening in West Africa. And I think that this model can be replicated elsewhere. I think that it was replicated in Sierra Leone. We hope very soon in Kenya. This is the women's situation room in prevention of conflict that can, by mobilization, by mediating, by also doing what? Monitoring and making sure the results, are transparent.
That is a great story. I mean, a very positive story. Thank you, Bineta, for that. And it's a lovely way to end because, it's a concrete, very specific example of a political movement in a country that has made a difference and something I think, people, men and women, can learn from. Which leads me to just change tack for just a moment. I threatened you with the fact I was going to read out a list of what we've distilled as the sort of key policy recommendation, action plan specific points that have come out of all of the meetings we've had over the last 24 hours. They are scribbled on bits of paper, so forgive me if I stumble from time to time. But we're just going to run through, and the reason I'm doing this is because I want you all to think and reflect on whether you feel this list of recommendations for action, that is, policy proposals, a framework of action points to come out of this, which will go before the Club of the Madrid when they write up the findings of this entire session. I want you to decide for yourselves whether you think it makes sense, whether you think some very vital points have been missed out, and that's the signal that I'm going to open up the whole thing to a wide debate. Don't regard us as a panel anymore, just regard us as part of a big debating chamber, and everybody's going to have the right to say whatever they want. But to set that up, I must go through the list. So forgive me if I just sort of plow through this list without much of a pause. You're going to get very sick of my voice, but anyway. Let's start at the very beginning. The first session, which I think most of us attended, was the plenary, which Bill Clinton himself chaired. And out of that, we noted down a series of concrete proposals. Not surprisingly, at the top of the list is quotas. The collective decision from the plenary panel appeared to be that quotas can and do work, that there's evidence that they give women greater access to political power at every level, from local through regional to national. And it was tied very much to Mary Robinson's idea of developing a critical mass of women inside the political system at all levels. And her argument was that, you have to reach a threshold, a critical mass, at which point, beyond which, things start to develop in a way which trends toward empowerment without, necessarily much more intervention. But once you've got that critical mass, it changes everything, and quotas can be a part of that. Other points that came out of that were outside governments that offer assistance, and we talked about this today, outside governments that offer assistance to countries with real sort of pressing gender empowerment, women empowerment problems should routinely engage with NGOs and with civil society as well as bilaterally with governments, that it has to go beyond government-to-government relations, that it's very important that assisting governments reach out to NGOs and civil society. And finally, out of that one, governments around the world should find ways of making a commitment to eliminating violence against women used as a tool of war, as a weapon of war, should make it a priority. They should somehow find ways of moving to a situation where there are practical ways of investigating crimes like that and ultimately bringing justice in a very effective manner and long-term eliminating the use of rape and sexual abuse as a weapon of war. Now, I talked earlier about fine words. I mean, those are very fine words. How you make that happen is something we can perhaps focus on before we end. Now, the breakout sessions yesterday, one was on peace and security. I'll race through these because otherwise I'll be talking forever. Point one, got to be a focus on education and cultural programs to raise awareness of gender issues. Well, I don't think anybody quarrel with that. It's a little bit vague. There must be programs to help women find their voice and exercise power in post-conflict societies. Yeah, I don't think anybody quarrel with that. Practical pressure must be put on national governments to enforce Security Council Resolution 1325. We've talked about that. And I think this was an important one because I was actually at this session. We had quite a lot of talk about justice in the context of Sri Lanka, in the context of other countries too, Bosnia. Now, the feeling from the panel was very much that justice has to be part of the post-war settlement. If it's to be sustainable, that's not really a gender point, it's a basic human rights point, but I think it's very germane in terms of the justice for women who have been used and abused, in warfare. There can be no sustainable settlement without justice, and therefore huge amount of international effort to make that justice real. The harnessing technology session, bullet points from that one. There must be a push, there must be efforts to push cultural change to put women in leadership roles within the tech sector, that means. Governments must work much more closely with global corporate businesses in this communications and technology field to improve access, ordinary people's access across the world to vital communications tools, the internet. And this can be done by public-private partnership. Much greater use of public-private partnership was a feeling in the panel. There ought to be, some said, government legislation to enhance the educational content, particularly, again, with a view to the notion of ending gender discrimination and improving the rights of women, the equality issues for women across the world. There has to be a way of government legislating to improve educational content in that context. Don't know quite how that would work, but it's worth talking about. In the equality in the boardroom and beyond debate, actually the main point coming out of that again was quotas. Quotas work. I think people were quoting Norway as a great example. 45%, since quota legislation in Norway, 45% of Norwegian company board members are women. 40% of Norwegian parliamentarians are women. In Chile, another country that's worked with quotas, 40% of elected officials are women. Again, the critical mass point comes into play. The collective feeling of us all seems to be that, quotas may not be something necessary for a permanent place in a society, but they work and they change the situation and they change it in important ways. So I think that was the main point that came out of that. And then on today's breakout sessions, again briefly, and I apologize for keeping my own voice going, On the session that was all about natural resources and women's access to the fruits of natural resources and the benefits thereof. Point 1, the Club of Madrid should promote linkages between social protective services and access to clean energy. Now, I confess, there are moments in events like this where I get a little drowned by the jargon. I don't really know what a social protective service is, but for those who do, that's a point that you can perhaps address. And forgive me because I don't. Number 2, much greater striving for cultural reform in order to ensure that women's voices, especially rural women's voices, are heard and included in decision making on how to use natural resources. Has to be a much greater emphasis on women's education, particularly technology education, so that clean energy solutions are maximized. Well, I don't suppose anybody would quarrel with that. Work-life balance, some of you may have been in that workshop session. Bullet points here. There should be mandatory paid leave for fathers. We should transfer the care economy into the mainstream economy, by which I think they mean societies should find a way of attaching a visible value to what they call the care economy. I mean, I guess that's just, it's a fundamental part of life that people often are in full-time caring or very serious caring roles within their own families. Elderly parents, other relatives, dependent children. But there has to be an economic value put on that to make that, a part of the economic calculation. Tell the state, point 3, tell the state to take the lead and start changing gender role stereotypes. Well, frankly, that could have been applied to almost any of these, couldn't it? There should be incentives for parents to take their children. Oh, this one, I had a sneak look at this one. I have no idea what this means, but somebody might. Incentives for parents to take their children to the peacemaking table. I don't know, is the peacemaking table a euphemism for the divorce courts or what? I don't know what the peacemaking table is. I know at my house, sometimes my wife and I need to attend the peacemaking table. But anyway, whoever came up with that point, feel free to expand on it. Vitally important, the panel decided to engage boys in this whole issue. I think this is a really good point. We talk so much about women's sort of thinking and mindsets and encouraging women, but of course men need to be feminists too. And to make a man understand these issues, you've got to get the child. So engaging boys seems to me quite an important one. This is a good one, and it would apply to the Sackur household. Improve the education of boys in domestic tasks. Now that is really important. I don't know whether the government's got a role in that, but if so, David Cameron's welcome to come to my house, because it's vitally important. And finally, on the trafficking brainstorm of this morning, women trafficking, and obviously that's a hugely important issue, and Bineta's talked about that, and many others too. One, again, I've got just points written down here. One, much greater focus on raising awareness of this as an issue. 2, use of social media and communication to educate women, it says, but I guess human beings, frankly, so that people can understand what's being done, what programs are legitimate in terms of trying to control this problem, but just spreading the word basically through social media. 3, domestic laws should, I think it's written here, domestic laws should address the international standards on this issue. Well, I guess that means, countries where trafficking is a real problem need to meet, sort of basic benchmark international standards for the control, for the intervention and elimination, ultimately, of the trafficking of women. And where those domestic laws in nation states aren't strong enough, presumably something's got to be done about it. Women's empowerment in specific countries, it says, will help keep women away from trafficking. Well, yeah, that's not really an action plan, but it's a valid point. And finally, making sure that laws and local customs support women's rights. Well, you know, that I think is, it's a shorthand way of looking at a very important and difficult issue of tradition and custom and maybe even religion. And we've touched on that, and Mary Robinson spoke about that in a very interesting way in the plenary yesterday, about where universal human rights and particular customs, traditions, practices, and even religious beliefs, where there is conflict between the two, between the universality of the rights and between the existence of the local cultural mindset based on religion or tradition or history or whatever. And I think making sure that laws and customs support women's rights, well, it's a big issue, but it's certainly a hugely important one. So, forgive me, there I go. I've given you what, we're a distillation of bullet points from all of the workshops and the plenaries. I realize we've roved over a huge amount of territory, political, economic, social, cultural. We've done it all. And some of those were very specific, some of them were just slightly more rhetorical. But it's now time, as you're all here, and you've all been so patient with us on the panel, for you to have your, oh my God, for you to have your say. And you've been so patient, because you've been putting your hand up for the last half hour. So I'm going to invite you to speak first. Please introduce yourself and make as pithy, as concise a point as you can.
I am a member of Club de Madrid from Poland. And, well, it was incredibly interesting panel. And we were sitting, all of us, and listening to you. And we moved from the problems quota in the board of companies to the women starving and not having food and water, quite simply, not only mobile phones. So I see incredible, it's not working very well. I see...
Let me make sure the microphone is on for the...
I see a big difference. Well, I can try.
Yeah, try that.
Thank you very much. You know, women can help men. It's very nice. Well, we feel the big difference from point of view of so-called democracy level if we fight for women's rights. In almost full democracy, almost because without women's rights is not full democracy. In almost full democracy, the tools should be different than in non-democratic countries or countries in transition. And we discussed this morning some problems connected with non-democratic countries, let's say. Thanks to Ambassador Hunt. It was a very good discussion. And there was also some proposals given by the panelists just this morning. But let me propose something for so-called full democracy. And because it was your question, our moderator question, how to implement everything what we know, because all lessons were have been learned. We know almost everything. I have a very, very thick book of all these resolutions from European Commission, European Parliament. Everything is written. But how to implement that? And in my country, 5 years ago, we decided to organize the National Women's Congress. I was one of the organizers. And it was 5,000 women, different age, different profession, from all over the country, 350 districts, from each district, at least one representative. And we spent two days discussion. By the way, I was the only male speaker during the Congress, I must tell you. The first Congress, because it was together 5 of them each year. And thanks to enormous pressure on the public opinion, first of all, and then on authorities, we could implement a lot of things during last few years. Quotas in all the elections. Now we prepare for companies as well. It's in preparation. Such a problem like education and textbooks and handbooks, to change them completely from point of view of gender equality. Because if you see in our textbooks, for example, the picture of, well, let's say, if it is under the caption, under the illustration, doctor or professor, is certainly men on the picture. If you have nurse or cleaner, is certainly woman. It's very simple, but if you are in the first class in primary school, you know very well that the man is professor and the woman is, of course, should be nurse. Or, so,
forgive me for being really
let
rude,
me say, if we could organize something like network of such a national congresses, national congresses in all the, let's say, democratic countries. We are representative of 62 countries all over the world. Let us start. We have experience. It's mobilizing very much public opinion, and then authorities must answer positively. So we changed a lot in our country.
I think that's a great, I like that as a proposal.
Network, I'm ready for all the information.
Right.
60 seconds. I just want to, I know this Congress very well, but one of the things that's critical to this model is they brought together business and civil society. They brought together local and national. They brought together old and young. It was a very inclusive operation, and the business community was vital.
Right, well, I'm fascinated. Hands up, just before we go on. Hands up, how many people think in their own nation state, that sort of completely across department, across culture, national exercise in focusing in so many different ways on women's issues and empowering women? How many people in their own nation state think that could happen and it could have real political impact? You've done it. Oh, well, you're well qualified then. But come on, are you being shy or are you seriously? Most people in the room don't think their own nation state is ready for that. Well, hang on, I just wanted to show of hands at the moment, but we're beyond it, are we? Yeah, well, I guess that's true, and if you're arguing that your country doesn't need it, then that's fair enough, then you can't raise your hand. Okay, but some of you have raised your hands. Oh, but you want a question? Okay, let's move on. I appreciate very much the Polish contribution. Thank you for that. Madam at the front.
I have a question for Myra. Thank you for your input on this study. Technology has been a key to what's been talked about here as possible solutions, whether it's simple technology like cook stove or telephony as a means of financial inclusion. Over the web now, there are companies like Kiva.org that have been creating capital for micro-entrepreneurs to which anyone all over the world can, deposit money. There's also something called crowdfunding, whereby, like Indiegogo, whereby a company, an enterprise can, discuss its project or product, and then they can get investments from anyone all over the world. I was struck by your point in that capital, in terms of cash by itself, in the most subsistence level kinds of enterprises, may not be functional. So I'm thinking about all this money, the millions that have been pouring in, and Kiva.org is only one, that then go into lots of micro-enterprises, and what would transpire as a consequence as it grows even more, because there are many others.
All right, thank you for that. I'll tell you what, because we're a little short of time and there's so many hands, I'm going to take like 3 points at a time. We've got two ladies here who've been very patient in the red and in the dark jacket, so let's get the microphone to you.
I want to propose a conclusion. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
That I think is maybe in the back of the mind of many of us. since there is not gender equity in any part of the world, not in Norway, not in Finland, not in the United States, and there is a lot that has been done during the last century trying to reduce inequality between men and women, I propose as a conclusion that no more business as usual, which means a new paradigm for development, which means governments doing differently, which means development cooperation not making a mess, trying to put women again in the traditional sexual role. So I mean, business as usual will threaten, yeah? We have the possibility of having gender equality. No more business as usual for the government, development cooperation, and everybody.
Okay, well, it's a, it is, as they say, a big ask, but we'll see if people, yeah. Madam.
Liz Roderick from Australia. I'm a Sex Discrimination Commissioner responsible for protection and promotion of women's rights in Australia. I mean, we've seen some great examples of women mobilising for gender equality. My question comes around men mobilising for gender equality because it appears to me, and I think most people would agree, if we want to deliver equality for women, we have to focus on men. Right. And just one of the examples that, and a practical strategy that we've been embarking on in Australia is to bring the most powerful men in the country together to advocate for women's leadership in gender equality. So they are the men who run our iconic Australian companies like Qantas, like Telstra, like the banks. They're the men who head our military. They're the men who are head of a Treasury, the Prime Minister's Department, the most senior public servants, to use their individual influence, but more importantly, collectively, to stand up and be a strong voice for women in Australia, and to also come up with game-changing ideas, of which they're about to launch 10 game-changing ideas. Even ideas such as in every conversation they have as the most powerful men, they're going to ask, if women represent 50% of Australian population, why aren't I seeing 50% of graduates who are women? Why aren't I seeing 50% of people on your board who are women? Why aren't I seeing 50% of my suppliers have women? So from those types of things as to looking at maternity leave as a career accelerant, not a career killer, to a whole range of other things. So turning a lot of these discussions on their head as one additional strategy to, of course, all the great work that women do across the globe. Thank you. Well, and just on that, just one final point, Club Madrid, when I look at, is made up primarily of men. Yeah. Can Club Madrid not be a really strong voice globally for women's equality, for women's rights, gender equality? Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the women in Club Madrid will lead the way. Go, Kim.
The problem the Club of Madrid has is that the resource pool, unfortunately, right now is heavily tilted toward men. I mean, that's part of the problem. Now, look, we haven't got a lot of time, and I don't mind missing lunch, but I suspect some of you wouldn't want to miss lunch, so we're not going to miss lunch, don't worry. So I'll draw it to a close soon. But does anybody, the specific points, one was about, of these three that we just took, one was about funding and being very creative in the sources of funding, using crowdfunding and all that sort of stuff. Is enough of that being done, and is it being done in the right ways? Anybody just quickly want to address that?
Sure, I just want to address Irene. I think that when just cash is given for very poor, that is useful. I mean, women need cash and they may use it for family transactions, and that may increase their own welfare. But in terms of business growth, it has to be paired. For the very poor women, it will have to be paired with other kinds of assistance, business management training, or some kind of assistance. You cannot pretend or think that just, $100 will really transform that very small enterprise.
So you must convey that to a lot of these websites that have sprung up and raising millions of dollars.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Let me quickly, I'm sorry I'm going to be really quick from now on, but the lady with a very strong declaration, we need to leave here with this notion in our heads and a way of practically implementing this declaratory message, no more business as usual.
I think that's true, and I think one of the ways that that's manifested is by bringing in all sectors of society to work on these issues. The way the business community has become more involved, clearly it's in their self-interest, but it's also a social good. So I think and also utilizing data and measurements to prove that this really does work and make a difference. It's not that side issue, that marginal issue, that nice issue you can handle when you take care of the big business. This is the big issue of the day if we want to have results in all of the areas we care about. So I think a lot of it is how we get out the message and how we bring in the partners.
And I would just say, I would like everyone to put on their calendar December 18th, 2013, and mark it as a day where you actually have to look at your calendar and determine, what did I do that came out of this meeting?
A great point, yeah.
That a year from now, you did something different. You can actually look at your calendar when you get the reminder and go, actually, I did something to change this. Everybody has a different way, so I would just challenge everybody right now to think about it and think what you're going to do in terms of collective action. While there are large specifics, each of us can actually do something.
Good idea. And on the last one from that set, I like the point about you've got to bring men on board, and you've got to find new ways to engage, influential men in powerful positions, and the media too. And you could say to me, why the hell are you chairing this debate? What kind of, what kind of message is that? And hard talk too, and that's totally true. We did an audit of how many women we have on our show, and I'm not even going to tell you what the result was, but it wasn't good. And we are taking many serious efforts and reaching out to women in different ways to get them on the program. Listen, you're totally right. I'm not going to quarrel with you. Right, look, I'm going to take two more, and then we've got to break for lunch, or else we'll all starve. Two ladies here. You first, madam. Hang on, we'll get you the microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Zainab Bangura. I'm the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict. And I just want to talk about the issue of Resolution 1325, what Bineta has said. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, when I took the position, I took a strong position that it is the primary and legal responsibility of member states to provide security for their citizens. And therefore, if we want Resolution 1325 to work, it has to be domesticated. There has to be the political will to own it nationally, to provide leadership at the national level, and all of that will ensure responsibility and provide political will. Because until that is done, there are no way. Because people look at this as it's a UN issue. It is not a UN issue. It's a member state issue.
Yeah.
And therefore, you have to be able to work. And I give you the experience. I come from Sierra Leone, where we had a terrible conflict. And I think after the conflict, that was just about the time when Resolution 1325 was actually passed through the Security Council. We were able to make sure that we train the police, because the challenge you have, sometimes police don't even know how to prosecute. And when we went to the judiciary, because we had the support of the DFID, we found out that the judges who were sitting on the bench, when they had graduated, human rights was not in the curriculum. So how can they prosecute?
Right.
So we had to bring some people to train the judges on the basic concept of human rights. And today I can say to you that in the police force we have what we call family support units. I'm now trying to twin Colombia to get people from Colombia and Cote d'Ivoire to visit Sierra Leone, because we have what we call the family police unit. We train the police officers, and within each police the police station, we made sure there was a unit police officer who were trained to deal with the issue of rape. Today we have the Sex Offenders Act in Sierra Leone. And the president has just appointed a gender advisor in his office. In his statement he made about less than a week ago, he's going to give a 30% quota for women. But we came a long way. When I was an activist in Sierra Leone, rape was not a crime in Sierra Leone. I had to fight as a civil society activist in Sierra Leone to be able to make sure that rape, now it's a law. We have the Sex Offenders Act. And when people were given evidence in court, rape victims, they were doing it in public. We had to take the judiciary on. Today we have a woman chief justice. And so a lot of advances has been made.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it is, the political will, the national ownership, which actually include women, government, civil society, and everybody working together. It is only then that you can actually provide support to women and the survivors of victims. I just came from the Central African Republic, which was my first tour. And what I did, I made sure I signed a communique with the government to say that in the security sector reform, in the judicial reform, in the DDR program, you have to make sure you include sexual violence.
And what we want to know, if we could all meet again in a year's time, is whether, when you keep monitoring Central African Republic, whether they keep to the pledges they've made to you.
We will have to provide the support because at the end of the day, they don't have the capacity. So in January, I'm sending my team of experts on rule of law and sexual violence to go and sit with the institutions, individual institutions, to see what's the support they need and how I can build their capacity. And I have done that in Colombia. I've done that in Cote d'Ivoire. I'm working with individual country. Because at the end of the day, the issue of sexual violence becomes low down. You have, in case of Colombia, you have thousands and thousands of cases. And we have problem with protection of witnesses. So these are all the challenges. That is the reason why you take the country by country and you work with them, you find the problems they have, the challenges, the capacity, and you deal with it at that level and you provide support to them.
Well, I thank you for that, and I think, what you're doing is hugely important, and I think, as we're almost out of time, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Bineta, but this idea of national ownership being the key to this is something you referred to earlier anyway. I mean,
But could I say that Representative Bangura comes into her position out of an International Security Council Resolution 1888, which I'm proud the United States sponsored, to ensure that sexual gender-based violence was going to get the attention it deserved to have, and now we've got somebody like you doing a great job.
Yeah, and one more, and then I think we're going to have to call it quits. So, Madam.
My name is Farida Al-Lagi. I'm from the Libyan Forum of Civil Society. I have spent 40 years of my life as a political asylum fighting against the dictator, because for me, I think politics and dictatorship in our region is the basic, biggest problem that has been really, for 40 years, devastated us. And that's why in Libya today, we are where we are. So the first point to be said, for the North, for the West, for the rich, for the European, for the American, please change your policies in working closely with dictators. That's the major issue, that the time now, respect the intelligent mind of the Arabs, of the women, of the youth, of everybody, because I think we cannot separate politics from what's going on with women, with youth, with poverty, with. So, the hypocrisy of the West has to stop. The game is over for them, not for us as women. We know how the business should be done. So now, what we have in Libya, because in Libya, if the revolution was not done by our own youth, the American oil company and the governments and the European, everything would have been going on, and we would have been touring the world talking about women and youth and poverty and all of this. So in my opinion, this is what the Club of Madrid has now to take the responsibility about. They should not come to governments and just, even the new governments now. Bineta, you have to come to Libya very soon. We are going through what you are going through. Because the problem also, the UN, the international donor, everybody is training women for leadership. Then the women are leaders and nobody is opening the door for them to be in the positions of power. So now, even after the revolution in Libya, only 2 women in the present government with 32, and we did everything. We know everything how to be done. We gave the names of the brilliant women to the government, to the council. Don't say, oh, we don't know you. Oh, you don't exist. Oh, whatever here. So now we have done that. But to be honest with you, that, we cannot minimize, and again, minimize in our region the history, the religion, the culture, all of this, the dictators, the fear. It's an accumulation of hundreds of years that cannot just be swept like that, like a dream. Thirdly, I'm finishing. I'm really finishing. I'm really finishing. Okay. The central, I cannot leave this conference without reminding all of you. Let us face the reality. The central of the problem in our region, that is a volcano that's going to erupt and leading everybody to hell, don't forget that, is the Palestinian issue, is the Arab-Israeli conflict. How we talk about peace for women and and the peace and security in the region is not existing. We cannot.
You have given us so much there. If nothing else, it was a warning against complacency, because it's given us a great reminder that for all of, I think, what has been a fascinating discussion, and for all of the optimism that there are real specific programs in place, and there are ideas that are coming from the floor, which I think are really good ones about what could be done over the next, year and 2 years to really move forward with this agenda. There still remain massive challenges. So it's sort of turning rhetoric into reality. It's turning ideas into action plans that get implemented across the world in some of the toughest places. All of this will set our diaries and our iPads and whatever for a year to give us an alarm in a year's time, and we can check and see what's actually been done. But the more immediate alarm is the alarm from my stomach saying it's lunchtime. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we go, please give a very warm hand to the panel. Thank you very much, and enjoy your lunch, everybody.